Now that you have an idea about wordplay techniques like similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole, metonymy, and more, you can use them to create more advanced techniques to amplify the meaning of the concept that you're trying to communicate. Let's take a look at some of these techniques. Let's look at the analogy. An analogy is a comparison between two things based on their similarities. It is a rhetorical device used to explain something unfamiliar by pointing out its similarities to something that is more familiar. It can also be used to create powerful arguments for or against an idea. Let me give you an example. Just as a caterpillar comes out of its cocoon, so we must come out of our comfort zone. Now here, I'm trying to talk about the reward of trying something new or challenging by comparing it to the experience of a caterpillar that goes into a cocoon and then struggles to come out of it and ultimately enjoys the reward of flying away as a beautiful butterfly. Another example of an analogy is from Shakespeare. We all know Romeo and Juliet, and there is a line from it where he says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." So here he's trying to explain the concept that it's not the name is not everything, and he explains that by comparing it to a rose. He says a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Analogies build on wordplay techniques like metaphor. An analogy is usually a more elaborate and extensive form compared to a simple metaphor. Another difference is, while similes and metaphors offer a one-to-one comparison, the effect of the analogy is extended across a much larger area of the text. Let me show you an example for that. Let's look at Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare again. When he says her hairs are like black wires, he's using a simile, and it's a one-to-one comparison. When he says black wires grow on her head, that is a metaphor, again a one-to-one comparison. However, when you look at the entire poem as a whole, you notice that he talks about various parts of his mistress's body and he compares them to various other things. That becomes the analogy, and you see how the scale of comparison is extended across the whole text here. Allegory. Now this is a story within a story. It's a narrative technique where a story, poem, or picture can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, which is typically a moral or a political one. It is characterized by having a surface story and another story hidden underneath it. For example, the surface story might be about two neighbors throwing rocks at each other's homes, but the hidden story would be about war between two countries. Allegory also encompasses forms such as fables and parables, where there are two or more levels of meaning that the reader can only understand through an interpretive process. Allegories are also used extensively in storytelling and songwriting. For example, one of my favorite songs, American Pie by Don McLean, is an extensive allegory about American culture and music in the 1950s and 60s. Another allegory is George Orwell's Animal Farm, where he uses it as a way to offer commentary on the downside of Russian communism from start to finish. Now, if you remember our wordplay techniques, you will notice that George Orwell has used a form of personification to create his allegory, and he uses a particular kind of personification called anthropomorphism, which means the attribution of human characteristics or behavior to a god or an animal or an object in particular. To sum it up, an allegory can be understood as a work in which the characters and events are representative of other things and symbolically express a deeper, often spiritual, moral, or political meaning. Now you might wonder, how is an allegory different from an analogy? Well, an analogy is just a comparison between two things that are similar in some way, and it's used often to help explain something or to make it easier to understand. The one enormous difference between the two is that all analogies break down at some point. Analogies can be used to explain a simple point or a particular specific act. Allusions. Now, allusions are a brief and indirect reference to a person, place, thing, or idea of historical, cultural, literary, religious, or political significance. It does not describe in detail the person or thing to which it refers, but is just a passing comment, and the writer expects the reader to possess enough knowledge to spot the allusion and grasp its importance in a text. Now, I find that allusions are particularly delightful because it's sort of like a treasure hunt where you spot an Easter egg or you spot an obscure reference to something and you feel like you have a connection with this author because both of you now know and understand the same set of events or stories or ideas or whatever it is that has been alluded to. We use allusions in everyday life. We say things like Achilles' heel and Pandora's box, which are specific references to characters and events from mythology. Allusions are of two kinds. You have direct and indirect allusions. Now, a direct allusion would be to say something like, who does he think he is? Jesus Christ? Where one is commenting on how a person feels about themselves, like he feels too full of himself, like who does he think he is, an also all-powerful being like Jesus Christ. Or an indirect way of making the same allusion would be to say, oh, he thinks he can walk on water, where you're referring to a particular event where Jesus walked on water and you're using that to comment on a particular person and how they feel. An example from literature would be T.S. Eliot writes in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, I am Lazarus come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. And then he goes on. But he says, I am Lazarus come from the dead. Now here, he refers specifically to the instance, the biblical story of Lazarus coming back from the dead and compares himself to that and creates an allusion. Irony. Now, this is a literary device in which a contradictory statement or situation reveals a reality that is different from what appears to be true. Now, a lot of people might feel that irony is something very complicated and it's difficult to understand, but I think that if you look at enough examples of irony and you observe the way other writers have used it, I feel that you would develop an instinct to understand and to be able to use irony in your work. The effectiveness of irony as a literary device depends on the reader's expectations and understanding of the disparity between what should happen and what actually happens in a work. This can be in the form of an unforeseen outcome of an event or the unanticipated behavior of a character or something incongruous that is said. Sarcasm. In simple words, it means to speak bitterly. It is a literary and rhetorical device that is meant to mock, often with satirical or ironic remarks, with the goal of amusing and hurting somebody or a section of society. Now, you probably remember Chandler Bing from the popular TV show Friends and the many, many sarcastic comments that he is known for on that show. So let's try to look at understanding the different kinds of sarcasm that's out there. There is self-deprecating sarcasm, which plays off an exaggerated sense of worthlessness and inferiority. For example, your boss says, hey Bob, I'm going to need you to work overtime this weekend. And you say, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I was going to get married this weekend, but it's not a big deal. I'll just skip it. She would have left me anyway. Brooding sarcasm. Here the speaker says something polite or subservient in a bitter or irritated tone. For example, he says, hey Bob, I'm going to need you to work overtime this weekend. And you say, oh, I'm looking forward to it. Of course, I live to serve. Then there's deadpan sarcasm, which is said without laughter or emotion. So it's hard to tell whether or not the speaker is joking or mocking the other person. For example, hey Bob, we're gonna need you to come work overtime this weekend. And you reply saying, can't make it. I've got a cult meeting. It's my turn to kill the goat. Then there's polite sarcasm. which is subtle but just a little too nice. This is the kind of sarcasm that sounds genuine at first, but then it slowly dawns on the listener that the speaker was just messing with him. For example, "Hey Bob, I'm going to need you to come and work overtime this weekend," to which you say, "Oh fun, I'll bring the ice cream." Then there's obnoxious sarcasm, which is the kind of sarcasm that makes people want to punch you in the face. It's not really funny or clever, but it gets under your skin, and it's usually spoken in a bitchy, whiny tone of voice. Say, for example, "Hey Bob, we're gonna need you to work overtime," and you say, "Oh well, that's just so great. Just what I wanted to do this weekend. Awesome." And then there's manic sarcasm, which is so unnaturally happy that it's borderline crazy. Example, "Hey Bob, I'm gonna need you to work overtime." "Oh my god, you're the best boss ever. Have I ever told you how much I love this job? I wish I could live here. Somebody get me a tent. I never want to leave." And then, of course, the last kind is raging sarcasm. This is the kind of sarcasm that relies heavily on hyperbole and threats of violence. This is the kind of psychotic screaming rant that you unleash on someone when you're about 3 steps away from like murdering them, and you need to vent your rage by verbally abusing them. For example, "Bob, we're going to need you to come and work overtime." And then you say, "Oh, don't worry, I'll be there. You want me to shine your shoes while I'm at it? Hell, I'll come to your house tonight and wash your goddamn Ferrari. Actually, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to go home and blow my brains out." So those are some examples of different kinds of sarcasm. I'm sure that you can come up with a lot more examples from the TV shows and things that you watch. Sarcasm is mostly used in prose and stories, but it would be interesting to see examples of how sarcasm is used in poetry.